um, clarify options, and discuss trade-offs. So with that, Craig, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Yes, thank you. And so I'm going to ask Stacy to put up a chart that kind of brings us up to date. I mean, there's been a lot of activity since our last discussion in meeting a week ago. Probably the oldest news is answers to 3 questions that came out of that meeting. I'm not sure that they require any detailed explanation because there's been a lot of information that's come out since then. I provided the board with some reductions that the administration, and as I explained previously, and I know the board is excuse me, aware of this, much of the numbers that we present to you is numbers that we've been calculating really since the beginning of the school year. And so some of the information that we provided you was, numbers from October and November, and we're predicting, well over a year out as we're predicting where we're going to land in June of 2022. And so as we've had a chance to, refine our numbers and look at individual cases and negotiate contracts and get further along on all those items, we've been able to really develop some substantial savings here, and we felt it was best to bring that forward to the board to provide you with up to the minute really information on the budget now. So I'll go through those really quickly and show you how we arrived at the 1.46 is where we're at today as our proposed budget. Regular transportation, we've shared with you throughout that we expect a new contract to be in place that will bring us a 0% increase in transportation. We had a placeholder at 2.5%, which again was a good scenario in these times, but a 0% is really a fantastic scenario. So really through Art's work and the bus company, I think recognized in the Financial Times, we're able to reduce $51,800 there. That in turn also impacts positively for us in terms of a reduction in special education transportation as well. But then also some changes to student placements just recently, very recently, allow us to make a reduction there, those 2 items combined for $64,651. As well, some finalizations of some discussions on external placements and some changes in that area as well bring a reduction of $146,515. And then finally, we shared the positive news on the grant from the state, bringing into the district $192,000. We're thrilled, 1, receiving the grant, 2, that it also is going to be available for us this year. It will be a while before that is up. I would say probably the best case scenario that those interactive boards would be available for teacher use this year would be after April break, and that is a pretty positive outlook. We are doing some work internally with teachers and administrators to decide which board is best for Madison and going through that work. But $192,000 actually obviously goes a long way, and that would provide interactive boards for Polson and Brown for core classes completely. And so we would be able to reduce some of the grant, but some of the lease request, as you know, that's $117,000. But what you do with grants and really in good faith, we should not be supplanting local dollars. We should be supplementing local dollars. And so our plan would be then to have Brown and Polson to have their non-core classes also receive interactive boards. And so when you think of library media, when you think of music and art, those are important areas to have this, especially if we ever were distance learning in the future, but even just the day-to-day teaching when we're in person, that would just be tremendous. So it would move those 2 buildings ahead, which is really the grant's intention. And so we would be able to reduce that $117,000 by $15,000. Now, and the reason the numbers are, a little complicated, as you'll remember, the $117,000 was for a leasing program that's paid over 5 years that has interest rate involved. And so, that is what we're looking at there. Those were the reductions. That brings us to 1.46 actually. And I will pause there. I know, last night and this morning there was additional questions. We just provided that to the board. We worked pretty hard on that today, and I know the board has had all of about an hour and a half less for the curriculum committee to digest that information. So we will go through that in depth, but I just wanted to stop there because that was a lot of information shared, and see if there's any questions.
The floor is open. Please raise your hand or
I have no questions at this point, but I'm grateful for the quick turnaround on the grant. I think that's awesome news and very timely and will be helpful for our students. And I think considering where we are in the year that we've had, I just want to thank everybody for the thoughtfulness and putting this budget together.
Craig, I had a question. Can you guys hear me?
yes.
Okay. I had a question what you just said about grants. So is that your philosophy? Is that a term of the grant itself that it cannot be used to fund a program that you wouldn't otherwise have money for, but you're supposed to use it you're not supposed to offset costs in your district? That seems, I hadn't heard that before. So I was just wondering if that's a term, like one of the requirements of the grant.
Yeah, so thank you for the question. Basically, what it is the grant was a low performing schools bond identified for 2 schools, and so the state will on occasion, not often, admittedly, but will on occasion follow up on the use of those funds and follow that, and so they would be looking for those schools to have additional support, and if they were following that, we had presented that as a need for all the schools, that they could have some questions on why we were reducing our budget to in receipt of a state grant. So supplant and supplement is very common language in state grants, and that's why I use that, because they will look at that. In particular, in this grant, I did not see it as a very specific term, but that's something that they do look for their grants, is that they would want to see that it's put to use in addition to board funds.
So as a follow-up to that, sorry, would the in addition to board funds, so they have to be for the same thing, or like would the technology position satisfy that requirement that this is what we were able to afford to put in place, so we're using the other money for these boards?
That's interesting. I think if the technology position was specifically for those 2 schools, like we were asking for something there, I would think so. The grant funds are not flexible, in terms of what we had asked for. That's what we had asked for, was the boards. I think that we certainly could make that case. I don't know that that's exactly the intent of the grant, and we had presented that that's a need. Eventually I think we will want to be in Madison, with the interactive boards in all classrooms. And I know, we're working on a plan to get there.
I can answer that. I can help to answer that. It was pretty specific to equipment that would help students to access distance learning as a condition of the grant.
I have a silly question. Who installs this?
So not a silly question at all. So the price that Art is working on encompasses everything, and so it's going to be around $4,000 per board. So there'll be an electrician that would set up the electrical connection if it's not there for that particular board, and then there'd be a outside vendor that would come in and install that. So the price would cover everything together, but it would be different vendors.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think that's wonderful, and I thank whoever completed that grant. I know grant writing is laborious, so thank you.
That was Gail and Art, and that was a quick turnaround, so we appreciate their work on that.
Well, I'd like to make a comment to put this into context. So and Stacy, if you have the numbers available, and if I speak, please step in and correct me. But I believe last year's recommended budget, the total increase was about 1.09%, give or take. This year, the administration has managed to reduce its initially proposed increase of 1.9% to 1.46%. So I think these are fairly lean numbers, especially given the economic belt tightening that we all face. And so I'd like to thank the administration for seeking out additional reductions without compromising, the core educational mission. That's not the
I'm sorry. I was just going to say one clarification, Galen. We did end up last year at 0.87.
0.87, yeah.
Yeah.
Even better, yeah.
Yeah, we had to cut twice. So I guess just piggybacking off of that, Galen, my question is, given, and I know this is for the 21-22 budget, but given what we hopefully will be, heading back to normal at that point. And so I guess my question for the administration is there enough in there to make sure that students are getting everything they need based off of what will likely be a year and a half of kind of disrupted learning?
I'll start, and then I may turn it over to others, but we are concerned about that. Absolutely. And I think we are, again, recognizing as Galen shared, the economic times in town and challenges that are there. But there's going to be unprecedented opening of schools in September or late August, and we will not know to great certainty where things stand. You're going to come off of then a summer slide that is typical, that there's really not much you can do to avoid that, and we would see where students are. We hope to have a summer academy to support our neediest students in those areas, but I've worked with other districts and heard what they're proposing. They're much beyond where we're at. They're double or more in terms of adding interventionists in the classrooms to be able to support the start of next school year. We do feel we have what we need is in place, but there's certainly additional needs that I think we are continuing to defer as we have been. In the previous year, I believe was a 0. So there's several lean budgets in a row. It's not just a 1 year that we're responding to, but we feel confident in what we're presenting, because if we did not, we would have tried to shift some of these savings to other areas. I mean, we do feel confident we'll be able to meet students' needs, but there are some certain needs, and we listed those out in the previous presentation that have been deferred. Certainly for me, that Intervention Academy, I would double or triple the funding, if I could, for that, and then expand the number of students that would be able to join that. I think some of the questions that were brought to us from the board about the Intervention Academy were spot on. I mean, I think we also shared those concerns, but we're trying to build a program that was cost effective and met the needs of our media students. Gail, is there anything you'd like to add to that? Because I know you've been working heavily on that, and we can get into the Intervention Academy now. Gail, if you like us to, that seems to be the area where the most questions landed.
Yeah, I think I agree with your statement, Dr. Cook, and I think that there's a lot of unknowns that we have that we have nothing to lean on in terms of other times in history that are similar to what we're experiencing now. And, one of our recent discussions was even trying to imagine incoming kindergarten students without pre-K experience as they typically would have, and the impact on, language development and some of the other skills. So we certainly have a lot of unknowns at this point. We were trying to be responsive, but also be responsible to the taxpayers to show a balance in that. But I agree with Dr. Cook. With more money, we could do more. So, but hopefully, what we're doing is thoughtful for our students who we deem most at risk.
So I'd like to open up and encourage discussion, because whereas last week was more of a presentation of the proposals, today is more nuts and bolts, airing out the issues. And so if we all agree that the spending is contained to a reasonable level, then it's really a question of the cost benefit. Are we meeting needs, and of the cost benefit of these and delivery of these proposals, whether it's the Intervention Academy or the SAT tutoring or the information tech IT specialist. So because the goal tonight is to give everybody a fair and free hearing, and to eventually we need to reach a consensus on this budget. We could do it tonight, if there's consensus on a vote, or or we could go back and forth and vote on it next week at our regular meeting. It doesn't have to be a terminal today, but I would encourage anybody with questions, or concerns to go ahead and air them.
I just need a minute to continue looking over the document that we got right before the meeting.
I don't mind jumping in because I probably sent half those questions, and I appreciate the approach of talking about the individual budget requests that we saw. I think that's helpful and prompts some of this conversation, hopefully. But so I 100% support the idea of trying to address not only some of the COVID related, I'll call them, and that's not a clean way of talking about it, but you get the idea, COVID related reasons that students might be behind in terms of ELA and math, but also some of the existing issues that we might have in district about students who are behind in ELA and math, or they were existing, or things that that are not strictly COVID related. So in other words, all of the students that might need additional support. And so this is not a dollars and cents issue for me. I'm not that worried about it in terms of the cost. It's more of the program as proposed. Some of you have read the answers to some of the questions that I sent in there, and I think others did as well. But I'm concerned about the model where, there are potentially some equity issues in terms of the students that would be addressed. It's not particularly widespread in terms of the number of students that you'd be able to work with, although there is I'm acknowledging there's some uncertainty there in terms of interns and other things that might be additions to the program that would help. It's also a very compact program in August leading into the school year, and certainly some parents might prioritize that, but that's also a big commitment for kids who are going to be as young as 6 to be tackling, ELA and math for 30 hours a week for 2 weeks. So I guess this is not a question and more of a statement that, as we go through the next week or so of figuring out the budget. And I recognize that that's not a lot of time to talk about this, but if there was a proposal from the administration that was at this cost or even potentially higher, depending on some of the other things that might be omitted from the budget after we're done talking about everything, that I wonder if there's a possibility of a different plan that could be put together, and a plan that is not exclusively summer based, something that might address how some of these issues might be some of these issues might be addressed during the school year, as well as any additional time for students. You know, the possibility of after school or even within the school day or whatever it is, just something that is more manageable for families and maybe more realistic from my perspective for the kids in terms of the gains that we're looking to see. So again, I just want to reiterate, I'm all about trying to figure out how we can make the gains for those kids, how we can support the kids to make the gains is the better way of saying that we know they need to make, that might be residual effects of the learning that was remote this year or other stressors that are, you know, helping to see that kids might fall behind.
I would piggyback on what you said, Greg, and I absolutely echo much of what you said. And for the cost of $25,000 for a 2-week program, 30-hour condensed, not really sure of the population, 2 weeks before school starts, I think that combination is really discouraging. And you've already set out the reasons why, but as a parent, as an educator, that wouldn't really appeal to me. And as much as I thought my child may need that intervention, I'm not sure that that would be the approach as a parent that I would take. 2 weeks, 6 hours for my youngster at a cost of $25,000. I think that's quite pricey.
So two pieces I just want to make sure are clear for everyone. A student may not attend both sessions. So one session would be ELA, one session would be math. And so a student could potentially only be there for half of that time frame. The other consideration we've had on this, and we remember, you know, in June of 2020 and where we were at, no one wanted to continue at that point or for the next, you know, month or so. And so staff and students were very anxious to not be, you know, part of schooling. So the August timeframe also puts us probably in the best situation COVID wise. You know, we know at that point all staff would have been certainly offered the vaccine well in advance of that, when we should be, you know, much further into the vaccination process. And so that was also a consideration of ours when we talked about August. There is certainly room to talk about, you know, something tied to the school year. We run into some of the similar issues, you know, in terms of transportation, in terms of family choice, in terms of other conflicts going on. You know, we know, you know, many families do want to get away that last time in August, and maybe that, for the reasons I just stated, that might be the first time some families are able to take vacations or do something. But also as well, you know, students after school are very busy here in Madison, you know, playing soccer and doing other things, and we're happy about that. But we also are happy to look at, you know, another option or an option that connects to the school day as well, because you know, I don't think there is any right answer, and that's, you know, why I started off with every single question, you know, is a great thought. I mean, you know, and it's a concern of ours as well. We would like to service every student that has any type of need to bring them out at the, you know, at their place that meets them best, whether it's tied to the school year, whether it's over the summer, you know, whether it's in some other form.
I would say that, in my opinion, regarding the summer program, I have reservations about it being that successful. I don't know that, you know, there's no way for anyone to predict where we're going to be regarding COVID and vaccines, et cetera. And, you know, I think the appeal would be to be in person learning. but you still run the risk of having to have this virtual. And I think that would considerably lose its appeal to families and students. And having it in August, those 2 weeks with, you know, the possibility that some students are going for just half the day, some are going a full day. I just can't imagine that families are going to be enthusiastic about enrolling their child in this summer. And I can't imagine that the teachers are going to be enthusiastic to go back, you know, to want to do that. Everybody needed a break so much last year after the school year. And I don't see this year being that much different because we're already into January and still doing, you know, some hybrid modes. And I just, with the transportation issues, you know, there's always that issue with the working parents that of getting the child there. If you say, oh, you know, we want to have your child there for a half day, I can't imagine that they would, you know, be able to support that no matter how much they wanted, you know, the extra for their child. I think if we could do this somehow during the school year, it would be more far reaching. It would help more students that wouldn't have access to it because it is in the summer, in the August timeframe.
So
I think those are all great points. One piece I would say is that Madison was one of the few districts to do special ed summer school in person. You know, and that was very rare. I was surprised when I heard that, because looking at those regulations, those were you know, a heavy lift. And so I think if we were able to do that in July of last year, that we would be able, okay, in August of this coming year. But everything else you said, you know, I agree with. I think that is, you know, there is some piece of that. Families have been driving quite a bit. You know, I certainly have noticed that. But it is hard in the summer, and you're right, when you take some time out of it as well, and it's a short time frame. But you know, I feel we put together, we have the draft of a, you know, high quality program that would deliver some results that we could report back on. But you know, it's a ways away, and so it's hard to say with any certainty what it's going to look like. And for the teachers, they would be applying. You know, that's, I think, as well, we put that caveat in there throughout. If we don't have the teachers to run the program, we would not be able to do it. Same with after school. I know at this point, still, I think teachers would be concerned about staying after school. Again, I'm, you know, positive about the outlook for September. I think we'd be okay there. But you know, that's something I don't think it's possible at this point either.
Dr. Cook, can you just clarify for me that this summer institute doesn't preclude a student who needs intervention from also receiving services during the school year?
Oh,
correct?
absolutely. Yes.
So
Right.
this is an additional thing because of, or is this a yearly thing that you anticipate being every summer? Is this a COVID only summer intervention? I just don't, I totally hear all the points about it being summer, but you're right. We had the highest in-person summer school of I mean, I'm not going to say how far, but I mean, we had close to 80 students coming in person. And so I think we can't know until we know. But I think it's a great idea, you know, as a supplement. But I would want to know that those services would be carried through the school year for students who may not enjoy coming in the summer, or students who may be identified in the fall as having or needing some remedial catch up.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's all would be there, that students that attend the program will most likely still need supports when we open school. Students that can't attend, students that weren't attending, that those would all be in place. It was drafted to address COVID, but I would say if we're sitting here a year from now and we're able to show data out that the program was extremely successful, and we're seeing the continuation of that success through the school year, I would be pitching to have it every summer. But this was drafted specifically to address COVID.
If I could summarize, so it seems that there's agreement that there is a need, that there's agreement that the cost is not prohibitive. The questions are on timing, participation, and effectiveness. Timing and participation pertaining to August, effectiveness depending on circumstance. Is that a fair summary? And
I
please,
don't know about the cost one, Galen. That's not what I heard from some of the people who were talking. I think there's a varied opinion on that.
well, maybe to be a little more precise, a cost benefit. I think.
Well, I know, but I think that's not. I mean, Violet was very specific in her comments, so I wouldn't say that there's consensus on that. Let's just say that. I think there's some concerns, and I think people see the benefit, but I don't think that there's consensus on the cost benefit or the cost.
So let me just summarize what my opinion was. It was for the effect of 30 hours a week for 2 weeks for 25,000, not having the number of students, not having the actual data collected prior to our agreement here, a 6-hour session for these little folks. I know that Dr. Cook had mentioned it could be broken up, but what about the student that would need both language support and math support? And the other thing that I was thinking as you're putting this together, are these our ESY students, the students that get the extended school year? So are we asking them to go for 6 weeks potentially? Or do we have a cutoff and they can only go in July and not necessarily take advantage of this program? So yes, the cost is a concern of mine. I think 25,000 for a 30-hour, 2-week program for our little folks in a 6-hour session, even if it is broken up, reading, math, 2 weeks before school. I just think that's a formula that, as mentioned, we don't have any studies that show us that that can be successful right before school. We have nothing other than a hope that it will, in fact, bring our students more success as they start in September. But my other question would be, are these extended ESY students as well? Because can they double dip? Can they go to both programs if they need?
One quick point, Violet, isn't it 30,000, not 25,000?
I have a paper that's in red 25. I'm sorry. Well, that's even more money.
Yeah.
Okay.
Violet, I can address your question regarding the students who qualify for extended school year services in special ed. This program is designed for students who are not identified as special education students that have qualified for tiered intervention at the end of the school year, which is why the program's written the way it is. So again, we do assessments all throughout the school year. We would be looking to our data to identify those students at the end of the school year that would qualify for ongoing support in the beginning of the year.
Okay. Very often those tiered interventions is data collection over time to measure success. I have a hard time believing that we would have reliable data in a 2-week time, because that's generally not how we measure data. It's over a period of time if you pre and post test. So
Right.
I'm just kind of going back. If it's the tiered model, I don't think we're actually following something with any sort of fidelity, since we're not measuring incrementally.
Right. This is not SRBI that takes place during the school year. You are correct. It's not designed with the same ratios, the same programs, and the goals and progress monitoring. It's basically a program designed to give kids an advantage before they start the school year, and to boost skills and also confidence before they start their academic year.
Which would just further support my first impression and my information that I conveyed, similar to Greg.
I have a question. So when we looked at the numbers, you gave a staffing model saying that you were expecting to need 1 staff member per grade. So for example, Ryerson, you've got K-3, so you're talking about 4 staff members, and then you gave a an example of the 15% that your assumption of who would need it or qualify to go. So you're looking at 11 students in kindergarten, 12 in first, 8 in second, and 11 in third, just for Ryerson alone. So when you say that these are the students that would normally be, would qualify for the intervention of levels 2 and 3 that you were saying, the tier 3, typically you were just saying in our meeting that it would be like a one-on-one ratio that they typically receive help, or one, I forget what you said, 1-to-1 or 1-to-2, something like that. And so this is like 11-to-1 for kindergarten and 12-to-1 for first grade. So it's a much larger group of students, but these are the kids who would be in that tier 2 and tier 3 need. So I guess I'm just wondering how that will work. If normally for a tier 2 or a tier 3, you need to have much smaller groups in order to be effective in their teaching, then this is considerably bigger. It's more like almost like a regular classroom in some cases. So how effective is that going to be?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple pieces to consider. This is in addition to, not instead of. So the students still would receive the intervention that they would receive by the design of the SRBI document during the course of the school year. So if you're tier 3, you would still receive your targeted tier 3 intervention with progress monitoring. This is in addition to that. And the idea being that perhaps 100% of those kids will not participate. And also we would bring in university people from UConn that would provide additional staffing per se, even though there's oversight of those people. We did have a very productive conversation already this week. I was joined by Kelly Spooner, and it seems highly probable that we're going to have some UConn participants in our program if we're able to go forth. So we're hoping to reduce those ratios. I want to, restate what Dr. Cook said. This is not, solely ideal. It's not an exact replication of what happens during the school year. It is a commitment to launch the school year with as much success as we possibly can, while being fiscally aware of the conditions that we're currently in. It's to give kids a boost. It's to have them connected to their schools, their teachers, hopefully their interventionists and some coaches, and to get some initial baseline data on how they're coming into the school year, how much learning loss they might have experienced. So, again, it is not instead of, it is in addition to.
I guess my philosophy here is if there's a need, you can't beat something with nothing. Right? I mean, the need should be addressed. So it's a question of efficacy and cost.
Galen, I guess I would say, and I spoke some about this, but just to put it out there, I agree completely that the need is there and that support is needed. I really struggle to think about something outside of the SRBI model, which is right in the title, scientifically based. I struggle to think about something that is so intensive. I just think if there was a way to address this programmatically in the summer, during the school year, before school, after school, whatever the thing is, that makes it more accessible, more widespread, even at a different cost than this. I'll reiterate from my perspective, and I know that that's different than some of the things that others are raising. That would be something I'd be inclined to support. Even the basic idea of this more spread out over the course of the summer. 3 hours on ELA for 2 weeks, even if you just focus on ELA, is a lot of hours for kids, and in a pretty big group. Even if we were lucky enough to get enough interns from UConn to have one per room, it's a lot.
This is just kind of a random question. It's not, I know you sent us the identified high risk, some risk, low risk. Are you guys able to do assessments on the people who've opted for virtual learning? I'm just curious. Doesn't really have a bearing on this discussion. I'm just curious as to whether or not we're doing assessments on them.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's certainly a challenge, and we are doing assessments on our distance learners. It's not exactly the same. We tried it in the spring of last year, and it does impact some of our norming. We also are inviting students who are distance learners to come in and meet with interventionists or coaches to do one-to-one assessments if they're willing to do that. It is a challenge, but we are absolutely trying to assess all learners.
You know, Greg, just to get back to your point, I'm just thinking out loud here. If you spread it out during the summer, then you run the risk of less participation. People have, you know, summer plans. If you integrate, if you spread it out during the school year, then you lose that element of a successful launch. So I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying there are trade-offs. You know, involved, right?
It's a great point, and kind of what I'm thinking about is something that is additive in particular. You know, if there are different ways of offering this, multiple options for folks to get this kind of support, that would begin feeling better to me. But that's just where I am.
Yeah, Dr. Cook, I think I cut you off. I'm sorry.
No, that was great. I hadn't fully formulated what I was going to suggest at that point, but what I would say is, you know, this is when we look at the budget, you know, and this is an important issue, no doubt, but when we look at the budget, this is 0.05% of the entire budget. And what I would ask is that we keep the concept of a Madison Intervention Academy alive, and allow us to go back and look at some of the concerns raised, and look at this model and then potentially other models like we've discussed, whether they're tied to the school year, whether they're spread out throughout the summer, and come back within that $30,000 threshold and present that to the board sometime later in the winter or early spring, and see where we're at then. But I would just hope that we can keep the money there. You know, as Gail has said to me several times, she brought this forward also knowing, you know, financial constraints, and brought $15,000 reduction in her budget, which she would have anyway. But I mean, I think, you know, she was really mindful of that, of the cost value throughout, and so has, you know, in a way attempted to pay for half of it with a reduction in her budget. But I think, you know, and the board senses this, that there's some unknowns in this because of you know, the problem of drafting something that's brand new in education, and we don't know many of the things. We could be coming, even if the board loved this concept, we could be coming to you in June and saying it's not going to work because we don't have staffing. You know, so I would just ask, maybe we have some more time. If the money can remain, then we can look at the what's there, and if we want to propose something or what another, you know, $15,000-$30,000 would also buy, we could also share that with the board too. If there's interest in that, you know, we can look at that as well.
I think we are being fiscally responsible to the point of throwing around nickels like manhole covers. You know, I mean, it's so I would perhaps we can keep the money allocated, table the exact implementation.
I have a request.
I think we would need to vote on that, to be honest with you. I don't think you can just say, yes, let's do that and move on, right?
Well, that's a good point, Happy. I'm not trying to change anything. We will have to vote, reach consensus and vote on the budget. I'm just saying it would be nice to approve the budget tonight. It may not happen. I'm just saying if we table it temporarily, I'm not
Sure.
suggesting that it would be an open item. It's going to have to be voted on yay or nay. You
Okay.
know.
So we were given that sheet that had the budget assumptions listed on the left, and then the total budget, including assumptions column. And I was just wondering, I would like to go through the items on there because I had a couple of questions just like especially regarding the technology smart boards, like the total budget, including assumptions for the budget request for the technology interactive boards was 117. So then you said that 15,000 would be the saving there. So then are you actually requesting 102?
Correct.
You want me to share that sheet?
Yes, please.
And what 102 would deliver would be the interactive boards for all core classrooms in Madison, and then the non-core classrooms, for lack of a better term, at Brown and Polson.
Can I just ask you if you can make that screen a little bigger?
Violet, I have a trick. If you go to the green bar at the top and hit view options, you can make it whatever size you want all on your own. I just figured that out. It's a
Did that
lifesaver.
help? I did try to make it a little bigger. Did that help?
I got it. Thanks, Katie. Oh, perfect.
So I don't know where everyone wants to begin, like the discussions about the other budget requests or budget assumptions. But I mean, my suggestion would be to start at the top and go down, because I know that I've had some discussion or some questions about some of the things. So, you know, I know one of the, obviously the things that we have no control over are not on the table for adjusting it all, like the contractual increases in salary. I did want to point out that we still have a contract open for our cafeteria workers who last year agreed to a 0%, you know, no increase at all for a year because of COVID. And so they're coming up for renewal. And, you know, I'm not saying that they will get an increase, but I think it's, you know, something to consider that you're going to have a contractual increase in that particular contract.
That's also been an area, though, that we've had some cost savings, right, with the reduction of staff. Not that we can really talk about savings in the food services department at this point, and that's a question I have for later, but we have reduced staffing there, correct?
Correct. Yes. And so we would hope some of that can continue on until next year, but we're not sure at this point.
And I just wanted to clarify on food service staffing, their salaries are not in the budget that's presented to you because they're not a budget line item because they're offset by revenue. So you won't see an account in your budget for food service salary.
Oh, that's helpful. I never knew that. Thanks, Heather.
But normally they're offset by revenue, but this year that would not be the case, correct?
Correct. Not this year.
So does anyone want to discuss the technology support specialist?
I just have a quick question. Stacey, can you email this to me? Because I need to look at it differently. It's very difficult. I have to shut off on my screen, if you don't mind. Thank you.
I'm going to have to stop sharing for a minute and make it a PDF because this file has so much of my junk in there. I think it's just going to be too much. So hang on one sec.
While Stacey's doing that, can I ask my question about food services? Art, are you here? Yes. Not to be, you know, Debbie Downer, but food service, I mean, this year is an anomaly for so many reasons, but one thing that it's not that different for is that we have been kind of in the red with food services year over year. And so my question is there a way to kind of stop that bleeding and create by saying this, I recognize that this is probably not the greatest year to ask since we're providing more food and having less students paying. But just in the future, has there been a conversation about how we can kind of make up some of that loss?
Well, if I may, I think, you know, over the past 4 years, having left the National School Lunch Program at that point, we were making steady progress towards being self-supporting, even without the contributions from the federal program. So I think we were on track, really. We had been seeing $90,000, $80,000, $75,000 losses year over year many times. And we were, we have a $75,000 item in the budget for the past several years to basically offset the, district contributions to offset the losses of the program. Now, we were on a trajectory there. Our best year was just under $40,000 the year before last. Last year became an anomaly because we ended up leaving basically in March and providing, only free lunch for pretty much anybody who, wanted a lunch at that point in time. It got kind of, it was very difficult to compute where we would have ended up last year, but we were on track probably to do a $30,000, $25,000 or $30,000 loss. And I think if we can get to a point where we're, trimming some, we've made some reductions in force, as for this year. And as we would come back, I don't know that everybody would be coming back. It depends on how things are going. There are certain provisions in the existing agreement that had a lot of things that were grandfathered in that through attrition over time. There's some advantageous, certain things will probably be less expensive. However, I think that short of trying to continue to contain our costs on food costs and labor, we are as close to breaking even as the district's ever been, I think, up until this disastrous time. Now you're really looking at, even the reductions we have done are going to be very limited in the success there because of certain, provisions in the contract and the conditions of we're open and we have to cover at a minimum level certain levels of staffing have to be there, yet the revenue is just not there. Revenue is down everywhere, but especially at the high school where in a hybrid model, we only have 50% of the population in at best, and not everybody participates in the food service program, of course. So, we've never been in a position financially to make the National School Lunch Program work for us because of the percentage of reimbursable meals, the percentage of free and reduced price reimbursable meals. So, we're doing better than we had done right up until the pandemic issues. So we're certainly open to ideas, and I think we've had some very creative ideas going along and have watched participation rates really grow over time. And then we hit this brick wall. So I don't know if I've answered the question, but we were on a trajectory that was approaching, I don't know that we'll ever get there. We'll asymptotically approach break even. I don't know that we'll ever actually break even, but we'll get close. So,
well, the Stein boys are doing their part, but yes, you did answer my question and I appreciate it.
The entirety of my household also bought lunch today, so we're doing what we can. But Art, just to go back in time a bit, because I think this was before my time on the board and I've never fully understood, is the presumption that, or what actually happened, whatever it is, that when we departed the National School Lunch Program, the lunches became more attractive to students and therefore more people purchased them. And that's what set us on the trajectory to,
yes.
Better financial position.
In a nutshell, I think that, we had just gone through a very, I don't want to say volatile necessarily, but in the sense that we've had a lot of changes in the National School Lunch Program that were tightening restrictions nutritionally and causing, I think, the food to be much less popular. There was a fair amount of waste. And realistically, the National School Lunch Program is a one size fits all, where, nationally, it's one model, essentially. States implemented a little bit differently here and there. But, we had a very small number of free and reduced lunch. I think our percentage of those who would qualify for free or reduced lunch was around the 4% number. And for a district to really break even on that program, you have to be a lot closer to, I think, 40%. So it's reimbursements that we weren't getting, and the participation rates were very low because I think it was perceived as less food and not quite as attractive. You know, everything. It was, you know, everything was 100% whole grain for every bread. You couldn't have. It was very, you had to force it. You had to take a fruit or vegetable, which we still offer all of those choices. Maybe not under pandemic conditions, but the idea was we would offer nutritionally sound, wholesome meals at reasonable, responsible prices. And that even without the reimbursements that we were getting from the federal government and the food commodities that we were being given, the idea was that we would improve in popularity because the food would be that much better. And I think, you know, the participation certainly doubled, at least at the high school. And we saw, you know, we saw, I thought, really great success in moving off that program. Even in the first year where people were getting used to it, we did about the same financially as we did the year before on the program, but we didn't take $150,000 worth of reimbursements and commodities. So, you know, I think that even in the first year, we made great gains. So I do believe, honestly, it was because the food choices improved. We went more onto like a university food service model as opposed to a K-12 model. And we certainly kept the elementary schools much closer to the national program, you know, than we did at the high school where kids were capable of making more choices. It was a very, very lengthy discussion over multiple meetings.
Sorry.
So since we have you, Art, I have a question about the technology support specialist. So I know that you're asking for a full-time person, and I'm sorry, I don't remember how many tech support people you said you currently have. If you would just review that for me.
For the desktop support that we're looking for, I have 3 people currently in these positions. I have 2 8-hour full year folks, and I have 1 6-hour 10-month school year only position. Prior to that, we had 4 6-hour positions only. And about 2 years ago, we abruptly lost 2 of the 4, basically because it was a very low pay. The hourly rate wasn't competitive, and the reduced hours, as far as it wasn't being a full-time job, while it qualified for medical benefits, it was very difficult to keep a couple of really, a couple of them got lured away. And we made the decision at that time to replace the model with the 2 8-hour positions and leave 1 of the 6 hours. So we actually took a bit of a reduction in the total number of hours, but it gave us folks that were there without having to do extra hours over the summer. And it allowed us to attract many more candidates as far as being able to hire them. Even though the rate of pay, I think the entry level rate went up, but it's basically the scale of the MACE union scale for a para 3. So it's basically the same position, but it's more attractive as a full-time position. So again, it's very difficult to get. There certainly are very, very good people that are available for 6 hours from time to time. I don't think under the conditions we're in right now, we're going to see too many, but I also think that, the way technology has changed, we're looking at folks that we really need full time. And, additionally, we did just add almost 1,000 devices to the inventory. They're all over the place now. And, I think I gave the metrics already about the number of work tickets increasing by 31%. It was a little over 31%. I had supplied some more information about metrics for that as well. But I mean, in my mind, it's a no-brainer that I need the additional staff.
The tech support guy, is this this is both hardware and software support. It's not just like one or the other. It's
Well, I mean, you can't really separate some of that software from it. It's, you know, they'll do hardware repairs, physical repairs. They'll replace screens on Chromebooks, parts that we can repair, things on laptops and PCs, that sort of thing. But they've also got Windows support. They do software installations. They do manage things. They do a lot of password resets and things like that. And they do a lot of troubleshooting, and they really are quite good. The three folks that we have are capable of doing some relatively sophisticated troubleshooting, and very sophisticated. In fact, we've got some good folks, but it's very tight for us right now.
I think it's also important to recognize I'm in a district where we have the panels, the Promethean boards, and we could not have done the implementation and into instruction without the tech support specialists. I mean, it was they went hand in hand. So we have this wonderful opportunity and this grant that's giving us these wonderful panels, and it's just hardware if it doesn't have somebody who can help out with the implementation. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind.
Can I ask you a question? So is that the going rate, 45, 4-ish?
That would not be a very high rate.
Doesn't seem very high,
No, it doesn't.
but I don't like giving money away, but I do agree. I mean, I am in support of tech specialist. I do agree that we have increased our technology, and furthermore, if we're going to get these smart boards or whatever the grant is, I think that that's an important piece of the direction that we should have probably looked at as we were increasing the Chromebooks.
Well, and these are the frontline people that are in the buildings on the ground, and they do support. They have the software tools to do some remote support as well, but it's mostly desktop break fix Chromebooks and support of all of the peripheral devices, especially the things we've added like webcams and microphones and other things that are somewhat difficult to balance for some folks. So their hands are full, that's for sure.
I do have to agree that the tech support people do make magic happen. I was being tech supported at work today for over 5 hours. So I understand without a laptop or tech device, your work is not getting done. So that is a big important piece, I think, for our entire staff that relies on technology, which is probably 100%.
The one thing I would just say, and I know I said this in our finance committee meeting as well, is I do think that from a town-wide perspective, the Board of Finance had made it fairly clear on the town side that they were not looking to add any new positions this year. This one would be the one that I would potentially make an exception for, but I feel like we shouldn't necessarily ask for an exception on that. So I'm just going to put that out there to think about in this year. I understand what the needs are, and I think, Art, you've done a good job of articulating it exactly, but they were fairly clear on that. So
yeah, I kind of have mixed feelings on this one, because I definitely see the need for the tech support specialist, and to be honest, I have family members that work in tech support. That's not like a super great salary. So, I'm hoping that it would actually attract someone who is quite good. However, I am thinking of the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance and how they're saying no new hires. So, I think that we should really think about that, because, we're trying to work in conjunction with those other two boards for the whole town savings. So we do have a referendum coming up. I still think that we need to keep this budget as low as possible. But I do like the idea of adding the tech support specialist with the amount of hardware that we just added and software as well. You know, it's hard enough for the teachers and the students to have any sort of issues with remote learning. So I would not want to have them hung up, you know, with issues that could be corrected faster if we had the right support in place.
Just want to note there are people with hands up, but I don't know if they're legacy hands or real hands, but
Mine was a legacy, but I'll take advantage of the opening. I think if I completely hear the guidance from Townwide for not adding a new FTE, but if there's ever an exception to be made, we could do it here and maybe find savings elsewhere, or continue to patch things together. And if there are savings down the road, add it later. But that might create, that might not hit peak demand.
And I think, when you have as many areas of technology that we've added just in the last year, I think it's the fiscally responsible thing to do is to have someone who can service these things. I think it will create longevity on the technology that we do have by having someone who is able to service them appropriately. I think that the technology department has been stretched to transparency at this point. And just to the point of the other two boards, I absolutely recognize, and I think I said it earlier, how grateful I am for this lean and super responsible budget, in my opinion. And I think our board has been very responsive to the other two boards in town by cutting not once but twice our budget last year in response to that. And so I think, again, in my opinion, I think our board should be putting together something that we believe in. And if they, think that it needs to be cut, then we'll come back to the drawing board. But statutorily, our budgets are separate for a reason. So that's just my 2 cents.
So I know we're going in order on the spreadsheet, but to kind of talk about a couple things together for a moment, and I think maybe this ties into Happy what you were raising as well. I suspect we're going to do the most talking tonight and potentially beyond about the two lines 12 and 13, the technology support specialist and the math interventionist, and lines 20 and 21, SAT and the Intervention Academy. Of those four, I'm 100% all in on the technology support specialist. I think I agree that we should not be looking to increase FTE wherever possible, but this budget does include some RIFs right above it, which are patched together to some extent, but still a reduction in force, and worth noting that when you look overall, there is not an increase in the number of personnel we have in the town. There's still a pretty substantial decrease. So the other thing I want to say about this proposal that I've seen is, Art, I think your data has been very fantastic. I think it's been really clear that the need is there in terms of tickets and in terms of response time and in terms of devices added. So I would agree that, of those four things, this is the one that I think we could most easily get behind, even if other boards push back.
I support that.
I'd like to say I agree with Greg, and I'm also going to say that I feel that strongly about the math interventionists as well. I think our kids in high school need that support. Math gets complicated. They are the only building that does not have a math interventionist. It has been, I think, a missing piece for our kids in the high school, and I really feel strongly about 12 and 13.
Are Tom and Emily awake?
I'm awake. I don't have anything to add that hasn't already been said more thoughtfully than I would, especially with Kathy's comments.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Dr. Cook, would a math interventionist, excuse me, be an FTE?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Would there be a way to what? Presumably the need would be when would that position start?
It would start the regular school year. It'd work the normal teacher calendar, work the school year.
Mm-hmm. Would there be any possibility of starting later? The reason I ask is that I know we're statutory independent, but it might be a tough sell to go for 2 FTEs.
I understand. I think you could probably start a math interventionist at any trimester. You know, that could be scheduled based on how that would work. It's, you know, certainly not ideal. You'd want the position in for the full year, but you know, I think in any of those breaks is when it could be scheduled for.
I think we have to remember too, the trimester model, you know, kids aren't necessarily taking math every trimester. So then you're creating, you know, some inequity potentially for some kids in that year.
That's true. I'm not going to gainsay that at all. I'm just thinking that if we were able to, recognizing that we're in tight times, if we're able to identify or develop additional savings in the school year to retain the option to add a math interventionist, maybe for trimester 2.
Was this was brought forward last year as well, math interventionist, or no?
No, guidance, I think, was the FTE that we said no to last year.
Okay.
Well, actually, the proposal was put forth last year for math interventionist.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It did not get approved.
I think we all voted that one down. That was a reintroduction this year.
Yeah, and I feel very strongly about it this year in particular, especially given that the high school has been hybrid throughout the year. I think math is one of those things that is particularly difficult remote, but additionally, and in the long run, I think, again, there is an inequity in the high school with not having an interventionist. And again, while I support the idea that we have to go to the other 2 boards, this board has always behaved in a way of what's best for kids first, and not looking at what the other boards say. If they feel like this is too much, then we have the discussion. But if the board feels that this is necessary, and I'm not sure that that's what we're saying, the majority of us, but I just think it's a dangerous slope to go down.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd like to bring it back to my comment that, you know, we are under 1.5%, and so really it's less about dollars are always important. Don't want to take that out of context, but it's about need, delivery, and cost benefit.
I also think, Galen, I think when it comes to resources, human resources, I think are way more, they go further than any other type. I really feel strongly about, and I'm hearing what everyone is saying, but I really feel strongly about the math interventionist and a tech support person. I think that those are 2 areas that are, I'm sort of like, these are going to be the hills I die on.
Well, I think we have agreement. Again, I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but I think it seems there's agreement for a tech support specialist.
Well, I think that if we're looking at FTEs, and then you're talking about one for math interventionist and one for technology support, I would say it sounds like there's much more support for the tech support specialist than for math interventionist. I don't know that I'm behind putting 2 positions in. Just because the budget is under what they want us to be doesn't mean that we have to max it out.
Oh, come on, that's no fun.
Well, but who's they? I think I'm sorry to get wrapped around the axle, but this is our budget.
It's not our money. You know that, right? It's
Of
not our
course.
money. It's the town's
No.
money. There's a finite amount of money that the town has to spend. So it's not ours. We can't just ask for whatever we want and hope we get it. We have to work with what the town can afford.
I hear that, Happy, but I think there are every year there, and there's a reason why the statute says ours is separate and apart from the other budgets. So our charge is to do what is best for students. And that's how I look at all of this. And I do think tremendous sacrifices have been made, especially in a year where our students are going to need more than they ever have before.
It's interesting, at the last, we just had the curriculum and student development meeting. And so I was asking about the math lab, and they don't really have the numbers. She's going to look up the numbers for me about, the students tend to want to go into the math lab when they can. And of course, in the hybrid mode, there's a lot less in-person dropping into the math lab. So I asked her, have you found like an increase in the virtual questions then? And it wasn't something that she had the data on right then, but I would think that if it was a major increase where the students were struggling and reaching out, that she would have been able to answer right away. But she is going to pull those numbers and get back to me on it, back to the committee. So I kind of, and I understand that an interventionist is different than a student seeking help. But I kind of, and I'm not saying that, math is hard. And that's where a lot of the, help is being sought. But interestingly enough, the higher math courses actually see less students seeking help, like trig or calculus, that sort of thing. So I don't know that across the board you could say they're definitely needing more help in math this year. We don't have the numbers for that to unequivocally say that.
But I think the difference between a math lab and a math interventionist, I know you made this point, Diane, it's the difference between the tiers that we talked about during curriculum committee as well. You're talking about providing something like an intensive support for kids who are striving in math. And maybe the reason why the numbers aren't quite so high when kids are in those higher level math courses is because those are many times choices kids make for the classes they want to take, and they're good in math. And so they choose to do that because that feels that's the direction they want to go in college, or it's the direction that it'll support the work they want to do in the future. But a lot of times our strivers are kids who have to take a math class to be able to get into college, but they aren't going to knock themselves out to pick math going forward. And they're really just trying to get through. And many times those are the kids who need that support. And a math lab, which is staffed on a volunteer basis, and teachers get busy and bogged down and aren't consistently available. I think a math I know, because I mean, this is what we do for a living, but I know that a math interventionist and the support that they can provide for students who are deemed in need of that, not by a volunteer basis. Usually those kids who go, who need a math interventionist are not going to saunter into the math lab. It's a whole different ballgame. And I think the math interventionist also provides not just that piece, but interventionists also provide another voice at the table to support students who might need to be placed in special ed services, or they have a voice in making decisions around math curriculum. math curriculum writing. These are people who give not just helping kids with math, but they're a bigger role in the math department and in the school itself. And so I think it's important to keep that in mind. This isn't just a person who's going to deliver math support. This is a person who's going to provide a service to the whole community.
The point of order that Tom has his hand up.
This might be a question for Gail. I'm just wondering, is there a way to be creative about how we think about the math interventionist? In other words, kind of piggybacking off of what Galen was asking, if this was somebody who could kind of jump in at some point in the trimester, my question would be, it's not ideal, but trying to get a little bit away from the FTE model. Is this something that could be, my terminology, farmed out to a consultant or put on a 1 year, sort of prescriptive model to come in, do the work, respond to a need, and pull out? It's not perfect, but I'm just wondering, is this something that could be farmed out to maybe a consultant or something on a term basis as sort of a way to address what I'm hearing, or maybe some of the concerns around the FTE thing?
Interesting question. I've never heard of a consultant that would provide instruction for a student who's struggling in math. That to me would be more like a tutor. Like, would we provide additional tutoring for students outside of the school day who might need an intervention? So I'm kind of turning your question into that question. We have not done that in the past because tutoring hours are based on a certain criteria, and costly. It gets pretty costly because there's a per hour rate that we pay our tutors. So I don't know if it could tackle as many kids, but certainly we could think a little bit about tutoring as a stopgap. But it would change the face of tutoring and the criteria. So right now we're pretty strict about tutoring hours and who gets tutoring hours, because it is costly, it is offsite, it is one-to-one instead of any small groups.
I think, Tom, it's also important to remember that oftentimes the person who is hired as an interventionist, whether it's ELA or math, is usually someone who has a certification or a consultancy certificate already. So when if I think back to when I was an interventionist, I was a certified reading consultant at the time. So the person who will come in as that spot, I'm guessing, when Gail and her team sit down to hire this person, they're going to look at their math background, and probably they'll be certified in some way as in a consultant role. So you're getting a 2-for-1.
Thank you.
So the way I'm coming at this, and again, I'm looking at the 4 lines that I mentioned earlier. The data that I've seen tells me that the technology support specialist and the intervention academy, although, again, delivery concerns, but I'm willing to take that might be looked at over the course of the spring. Those 2 things really reflect needs of the district in terms of data that we keep receiving from various sources. The math interventionist, I think, would be really nice to have, and I don't see that as being one of the main priorities. I don't think it's what I think. There, in fact, might even be other things that could be built into the budget that I would support more than a math interventionist, based on, again, data that we see internally or externally. But that's where I'm at in terms of a year where I know we're going to struggle with budget one way or the other.
If I could, I was trying to say something earlier, but every time I had a thought, Kathy took it, which was perfect. I mean, she shared really what I was going to share, except for one piece, which she would probably share later if we kept asking her. based on, we just had a presentation at the curriculum committee. I know not everybody saw that, but when we talked about tier 3 support, so this would be the tier 3 support at the high school, which is really at this point absent. You know, we do have the math lab. I would view that more as a tier 2 type support. It could be one-on-one, it could be small group, but it's students, you know, self-selecting. This is truly, you know, signed up for that additional support. The additional certification, ideally, as mentioned, perfect if you had somebody math and special ed certified. You know, this is really geared towards, you know, our level 3 math students, you know, who are struggling, but, you know, looking at college and beyond, and really trying to get there. The number one thing that admissions counselors look at is math scores in high school, you know, particularly Algebra 2, but even throughout, because that's such a great predictor of success in college. And so really this would help those students, you know, to achieve higher grades, push them, you know, into higher level math that will hopefully avoid them having to take, you know, an uncredited math course in college. And so there's lots of benefits to it. I agree with what's been said so far in terms of, you know, some of the concerns cost wise, certainly, but I just wanted to share that in terms of some of the benefits as well.
I have a question about that. If math is for, you know, from a college perspective, why do we then continue to only do math 2 trimesters a year instead of doing the whole year of math? That seems completely counterintuitive. And
Well, not all 2
could
trimesters.
eliminate the math interventionist, right? If kids were able to be in the math class for the, I mean, I think there may be some math that is some levels of math honors or something that are all year, but I know like my son is a freshman, he's only going to have it 2 trimesters. And I think like sometimes junior year, you could have it like your first 2 trimesters of your junior year and then your second 2 of your senior year, and you kind of skip a whole year of math there anyway.
So I may need Gail, or I know TJ is here as well, to correct me if I'm wrong. I would imagine the AP courses, I believe, are still a full year through in the high honors, and then the other courses, you know, what I'm imagining is we're completing the curriculum because students are taking less classes, slightly longer periods, you know, during those 2 trimesters. Am I correct on that, Gail?
Yeah, and I'll turn it over to TJ to talk about the benefits of the trimester schedule. They did a complete study on it a couple of years ago. I do want to point out that certainly for students in certain math courses, you're correct, they only have 2 trimesters out of 3. But if you increase the course to 3 trimesters for all students, then the increase in FTE is also far greater, and the impact on the budget is greater. It would, and we're not seeing data that suggests that every kid needs it. We're not seeing an overwhelming amount of students who are struggling in math, but we have seen and referred to studies that indicate that the disruption to education this year will impact math to a higher degree than ELA. And that was pointed to in the last budget presentation. Also, we do have data that was shared with the board last year in the curriculum committee that indicates that looking at students who were accessing the math lab predominantly through the trimester, 72% of those students were students who were in level 2 classes. So there is data to suggest that those students are reaching out for help. Not necessarily all students in level 2 that need it are reaching out for help. TJ, do you want to add anything on the trimester piece?
Sure, Gail, thanks. And good evening, everyone. The reason that some students and many students don't have a math course for the entire school year is based on the length of our class periods. So a 2 trimester course is actually equal to a full credit course. The 3 trimester courses equal a credit and a half worth of time. And in order to balance the schedule, you know, if there's 12 sections of Algebra 2, you know, at least 4 of those will have to meet trimester 1 and 2, 4 will have to meet trimester 2 and 3, and 4 of them will have to meet trimester 1 and 3. And, you know, we did a lot of data research years ago, and we found that the students who had those gaps actually performed at least the same, and in some cases better than students who didn't have the math gaps. And while we're scheduling, we also look at, Happy, the point you brought up was, which is significant. If a student doesn't have a trimester 3 math course, we try to make sure they have a trimester 1 math course the following year, so there's not an extended gap. And several of our math classes, for example, are 3 trimesters, so students do have math. And students do average, if I'm not mistaken, I can get you a number, many more credits than the 3.5 that are required for graduation because of the trimester schedule.
I know definitely, in particular, my daughter, she had math that was affected the last trimester with virtual learning, and then she didn't have math this whole first trimester 1, and now is in honors math for trimester 2. And that time gap with the difficulty in virtual learning in the spring definitely, reared its head when she started trimester 2 doing math. There was like a significant gap that never would have been there before. So I think that, that's definitely something that would impact the learning.
So that's an argument in favor of the math interventionist.
I think it's also important. I think it bears repeating, and I'm going to say it again. I really thinking about this FTE as just a person who's going to work with kids who are struggling is a narrow vision of this position. I think it's so important to understand that this is another specific voice that will make change happen and help grow our math community for tier 1 and tier 2 and tier 3. And also it'll trickle down to all, these interventionists support other teachers in understanding of math. Interventionists provide PD to teachers that will be delivering math instruction to all of our kids, whether they're pre-K all the way up to grade 12. So I know how Gail runs, her ears, has her coaches and her interventionists. She squeezes all of the juice out of that. And I think that knowing how teachers flock to those people and ask questions around how students are doing and what is it that you're doing with that child that I can parlay in my classroom and do that as well. And I think it's such a much broader position than just a person who will work for just the strivers. I think it's so important for us to understand that this is way broader than that and very necessary.
I have a quick question for Gail. On the question that was submitted about how many math interventionists do we have, and we have listed like Polson is 0.8 FTE and Brown is 1 and Jeffrey's 0.7 and Ryerson is 0.6. Are these all individual building based interventionists where they don't go to any other building, they just stay in their own?
No, some of them are fractionally shared. Some of them, and I don't have the exact names and positions in front of me, but definitely there's some creative scheduling there.
And there's no room there to add hand?
No, they're pretty tight in terms of time for the buildings that they're currently in.
Thank you.
All right. Does anybody have any more comments on the math interventionist? By the way, it's this is all fascinating. I could and would be here as long as it takes, but if perhaps we should move on to another topic. I don't know that we will achieve a consensus tonight and call a vote. That's the goal. But if we're going to do that, then we should think about whether we're voting on the budget as a whole or on a line-by-line basis. And I'm not sure what the precedent is.
I would prefer to do line by line.
We've never, ever, ever done that before.
Okay.
I would like whole.
I don't like the whole, because then there's things you support and there's things you don't, right? And so you don't, like, I wouldn't necessarily want to, so I think we have to actually, we used to just do this in committee. We would go line by line, but until we decided to move this to the whole board, but in committee, we would like go through this and then make a recommendation to the board. But I don't think we need to go through the entire line. I would just think the new asks would probably, just because that seems to be where the least amount of consensus is, or it's hard to get a sense of who supports what.
Well, I think we need to be clear and solid on the proper procedure. And secondly, we've already quasi-tabled the idea of the Madison Intervention Academy with the idea that if it's not working, if we don't think it will work as proposed, we should give the administration another shot to come up with something that that might fill the bill. If we're not clear on line, and Greg, please feel free to speak up. If we're not clear on line by line or budget as a whole, we don't have consensus on that, then I don't know that we should call a vote for tonight as much as I would like to.
So there are no rules. This is the Wild West of budgeting. You could approach it either way. I would suggest that a line by line item vote might not tell you what the final vote would be, because you're only getting feelings about that one particular line item. So for example, if there's a 5-4 vote about one and a 6-3 vote about another and a 7-2 vote about another, you don't necessarily know that all of those things add up to consensus. So just putting that out there mathematically. I think just one point of clarification as well, that I just want to clarify what Craig proposed, because I think, Galen, it was a little different than what you just said. It was the idea that we would potentially approve line 21 as part of a whole budget, the Madison Intervention Academy, and that the administration would look at that over the course of the spring, not in time, not like over the next week, basically. Is that right, Craig?
Yes, thank you, Greg. Yeah, I was wondering how we were going to come up with any better information for you in a week, so I appreciate that.
It would be planning dollars in effect, right?
And if I may, I know the approach some boards take is that someone could make a motion for the budget that they were supporting. So somebody could make a motion to say, I approve the administration's budget as presented at 1.46, and then there might be a supplementary motion that says I support. Greg can help me out with this, but I would support the proposed budget minus something or adding something, to that effect, and then you vote on the supplemental motion first, and then go back to the main motion if you need to.
So if I can, Galen.
Yeah, please.
I would like to make a motion. I have tremendous amount of respect for the administration, and they are the experts. And I think they are the experts in knowing what our students need. So if you will allow me, I would like to make a motion to approve the administration's recommended budget.
I would second that.
Discussion.
Okay, discussion.
I find it, I think that we're not going to find consensus on that when we've had such diverse opinions regarding the separate new additions to the proposal, the SAT, the Madison Intervention Academy, Madison Interventionist, the smart boards. We haven't even discussed everything yet.
But I respect the diverse opinions, and we might not get a unanimous vote. But I think that's part of our charge, right? Is to discuss. I think we have discussed these. We have looked at our budget books. We have had, time as a board to discuss it together and hear each other's opinions. I'm not seeing a lot of movement in people's opinions tonight. And so, at what point do we move forward, is my point. And again, I think, we have a tremendous amount of expertise in our administration. And I have in the past, and we have in the past made cuts to the budget because of circumstances. To me, this is a fair budget. And so that's why I made the motion to approve it.
Yeah, technically, did we need a motion to add a motion?
No, you made a motion from the floor and that's allowed.
Okay, thank you.
I would just add to that, I haven't had a lot to say tonight because I feel much like Katie has said that I think this is a lean budget, a responsible budget, identifying needs that have been identified this year and in previous years that have been put aside. We've talked about the SATs before. We've talked about the math interventionists before. We've put them off. We know the needs are there, some of those now more than ever. And I think it's a very responsible budget. And I also appreciate the administration coming back and making even further changes. So I feel like I've had enough time to review it. And that's why I would second the motion.
So I was not here last year when you talked about the SAT, and I asked in finance and no one told me anything about the reasons that it's denied. So from my perspective, we've not discussed that at all. And so we're jumping to a vote on it to move things forward, which is fine. Katie put the motion forward, so we have to see it through. I'm just not clear how we vote conditionally, like I support this minus XYZ. I don't know how that works. So I just vote no if you don't support the full budget as is and then put something else forward. Is that what happens?
And we could be here all night.
Procedurally, you'd either make a request for an amendment to the motion, which the motion maker would either accept or not. And if they did not, in this scenario, you would have to vote against it, assuming that's what you were looking for.
So does this mean that we halt, terminate our item discussions, our itemized discussion, and just go right to the conclusion?
That's basically.
That is the motion on the table.
Well, yes.
I did have
but I mean, we're still in the discussion mode. There's nothing precluding anybody from discussing any single line item, for further clarification. I would just say that I mean, there are several points of agreement here. I think the administration has done a tremendous job. I think that we're under where we, it's a very modest increase. I think it's important to air the issues. I think it's important to not come to consensus for consensus sake, but I think it's important to have a pretty high degree of unity on a vote like this, right? And so there are individual the questions seem to be around efficacy and delivery for some of these. There are individual concerns. For instance, I would favor voting for the budget, but not necessarily funding the math interventions right away. But if there's money to later in the budget, granting Dr. Cook the authority to do that. That's not comprehended within this motion. Right.
I would like to add to that I would like to remove the SAT after school weekend option, as that was presented last year, and we explained some of the rationale for not wanting it, and a part of that is because there are so many free available resources, and I mean, I just don't want to reiterate everything that we've gone through in the past, but we thought that $37,000 for the SAT net cost share, or offset, whatever, given all the programs available and resources available, Khan Academy being one of them that is utilized by most high schools or many high schools. I'm opposed to the SAT 37,000, I think it was. So if you're going to make a vote or present a vote right now, I would say no to the budget. There are some things on here that I don't agree with.
that's a tough call to vote down a budget on the basis of a small dollar amount. I'm not saying it's wrong to do that. I'm just saying that's,
Oh, no, I had a couple. It's
yeah.
But if
I
we're not
think-
going to do line item and you have to vote on it as a whole, then if you disagree with part of it, then you're going to vote it down. I mean, that's the way that the motion is worded. So
Also, it's been brought up repeatedly that we are trying to do the best for our students. So if you don't think this particular program you're not voting for it on the merits of the program, it's appropriate to vote it down, even if it's a small dollar amount.
Yeah, I have to say, Violet, originally, and last year, I certainly had that opinion about the SAT program, but hearing what we heard from parents this fall about the SAT and given that, families, we had several meetings and also the several, I don't know if you've attended them, the high school PTO meetings where parents really were talking about that as a need. So that's what kind of brought me around this year to that.
Since we're talking about the SAT, and just to put this out there too, at 8 something rather than at 11 something at night, we could technically discuss the motion forever until someone until someone calls the question and or there is no more discussion. Calling the question, just as an aside from parliamentary procedure, requires 2/3 of the people to say yes, discussion is over if it has not naturally ended. All that being said, the SAT option was and this is not really my area of expertise by any means, but it was raised with a lot of concerns last year, and I think a lot of those remain. And I think it's an odd year to tackle this for 2 reasons. I think it is a remote year potentially still for a lot of students, and it's going to make this complicated at the high school level. Certainly, we have hopes that will end later in the spring, but who knows, right? We don't know what next year is going to be like. The other piece of this is I think there's declining interest in the SAT from post-secondary schools, and there's a lot of push and pull in the higher ed space right now about what the SAT really means and whether or not it should be used as a priority in terms of admissions decisions. So just putting that out there. Again, I'm just trying to prioritize the budget and the items that I'm seeing, not only in terms of efficacy from my perspective, but also in terms of what hits the most need that we're seeing when we're sitting in all of our other committee meetings all year. So, yeah.
Well, the argument for the SAT is that it's used by the state of Connecticut as part of the assessment of the school district. Secondly, it could be a matter of equity. I mean, any amount of exposure to the SAT will help improve scores. The College Board, I think, says something like 20 hours will improve it, about 70 points. This is based on study with Khan Academy. In my view, it is absolutely true that that most colleges are test optional and that it's being de-emphasized. So that piece of it's correct. To the extent that it helps us further our schools' ranking and provides equity, I think the marginal benefit is above the marginal cost for SAT. It's not a huge item in my opinion. This is just my opinion. But I think those would be the arguments for the SAT, the pros and the cons.
So just as an FYI, the Guilford Library usually offers the practice SATs, and this year they are not. And on their website, they have, 4 free websites that offer resources and online practice. One of them, of course, is Khan Academy, and there are 3 others there that are listed. So like Violet had said, there are many other resources for practicing for the SATs. If I recall correctly, the SAT scores from Madison have always been, including last year, I believe, have always been good. And they have not been, like our other test scores, doing not as well. So I guess I'm wondering why this is a priority this year. I don't honestly see this year that different from last year. I mean, last year we had a very, very slim budget, and we did do line item. We went in saying, we were only going to increase in a couple of areas, one of them being security. And, security is never an issue with the board. We always support security. And so I don't agree that we've never done line item. And that was my only experience doing it. And that when Kirk led it, and it was very line item, it was this and that's it.
I think it's also worthwhile to remind everybody that we live in a community where there are, and Art could probably give you the numbers, there are struggling families. And for us to put forth a wish list of, and while I'm not disagreeing, they are certainly helpful to have items, I think we need to think in terms of what is it we are asking of our community? What is it we are asking of them when we vote buildings? We're talking buildings, we're talking major infrastructures, facilities. So it's not really, I mean, while I respect, the time and effort and certainly the thorough explanation, I'm looking beyond just these numbers. I'm looking beyond, I'm looking at what are we going to vote when we put forth to the community more than just this budget.
All right, we've had good discussion. Discussion is not closed with anybody. Does anybody else have any comments, questions, or concerns? I mean, anybody from the administration, members of the board?
The only thing, I always, of course, have something to say. The only thing I don't think Katie would accept a motion to alter her vote, so I'm not going to put it forward, but I think I am uncomfortable with the idea of keeping money in a budget that's unallocated just for intervention. I understand the need for it. It just sort of goes against, I'd like to know what we're spending our money on, basically. However, in the interest of compromise, I would be willing to keep that money in, and to see, because there is a need for it, and also support the technology support specialist, and then not the math interventionist or the SAT program. So that's where I'm standing. And I'm not going to make a motion, but that's kind of, I would be willing to consider that.
I enjoy the moments when happy, and I agree. So I'm going to make the motion, and Katie, just for clarity's sake, you either just accept this or don't. I'm making a friendly amendment to the motion to approve the budget as presented minus the SAT line item and the math interventionist.
Can I ask Stacy to just, can you give us what the percentage increase is with those changes? I'm sorry to put you on the spot.
Just did. I just deleted those two out. And you could see down here, the percentage now is down to 1.3, and this would be the total that the vote would be. We would have to include in the motion the total budget.
So Greg and Happy, while I appreciate that friendly amendment, you are right. For me, this is not about dollars and cents. This is about what our kids need. And when our administrators tell us that these are things that our kids need, I tend to believe them, particularly for academic supports this year more than ever. And so, and again, I don't think they are substantial enough to create a concern. So that's where I stand.
Would you be willing to accept the friendly amendment?
This is a lot of pressure on one person. I'm just saying.
I understand that. You made the motion. It's so. Would you be willing to accept the friendly amendment with the proviso that if there are savings in the future, the board could revisit the issue of a math interventionist in conjunction with Dr. Cook.
Well, Galen, the thing about that is that we generally do have savings. In fact, this year we had it, excuse me, sorry, I'm getting feedback. We've had a tremendous amount of savings this year, given that we had to essentially shut the buildings down in March. And we give those back to the town. We are not able to hold things in reserve. Right, Stacy? I mean, we can't just.
If we have savings during the year within the budget, you can certainly do a line item transfer and fund that within that budget year. But yes, you're correct. At the end of the year, whatever was not line item transferred does get returned to the town.
And then my issue about the math interventionist would remain that, you know, you're starting something in the middle of the year. What about those kids that have first trimester math, or, you know, that could have used that? I heard all of Dr. Cook's and Kathy's discussion points about that, and feel even more strongly about it than I did before. But beyond that, again, I think we have an administration that I trust, that I think they've told us they would like to do more if they could. And they have been mindful of cost.
I completely agree with your opinion on the administration. And this is not an ideal situation. It would be a compromise in the interest of board unity to send a strong vote in favor of I think you're more likely to have a strong vote in favor of the friendly amendment than if not. My sense on this. And then secondly, we would be adopting a formal mechanism to review this, unlike some of the kerfuffle we had a couple years ago with the ESS. We did add that later, after the finance committee had brought.
Yes, I still have scars from it.
Yes, right. So this is designed to circumvent that.
Galen, there's another possibility here too, just to put it on the table, and I'd be interested to hear what Dr. Cook has to say about it. But there is the possibility, Katie, that hearing the different voices about this and different perspectives, that the administration could ask to go back to the table themselves and think about it, rather than us trying to go line item or not, and that we could talk about it next Tuesday. So a withdrawal of motion might allow that, but I don't know if that's of interest to the administration.
That's an interesting ask in terms of that piece. Certainly, we recognize unity of the board on the budget is important. You know, I think it sends a message to the community that the board is behind the budget. You know, I think that we went through many different scenarios and discussions to get to this point. So as was said, everything on here I think is very important to us. There's a whole list of things, you know, totaling over, you know, $1 million of things that didn't get to this point that we felt were needs that didn't. But there's some really good things in here for Madison students, and so if the board asks us to do that, we certainly can do that and come up, you know, next Tuesday. I don't believe we're going to find anything of the, lack of a better term, low-hanging fruit type things that I presented, you know, yesterday. I don't think we're going to be able to find that at this point. Things like SAT prep could be potentially funded with some savings. A staff person continuing is not, you know, that's not likely, as Stacy shared, but you know, it could be something that we try and buy the materials or something like that out of this year's budget, and then, you know, can reduce that SAT costs some. That could be a potential, but I don't think there's much way around the math interventionist piece.
I think, you know, we have some other board members that we haven't heard a lot from, so I'm curious. Is Tom still on?
Yeah,
oh, there he is.
I am. I'm honestly, I am listening, and I'm taking it all in. An immediate reaction, I would tend to agree with on line 20 on the SAT after school option, that that would be something, I think, along the lines articulated by Greg that I think would be a problem for me on the final vote. I think with everything else, I appreciate and I understand the expertise that's being brought and the content that's being brought to talk about the other three items here. So my issue, I think, right now would be on the line 20 for what we did last year, and I do think. I think Violet made a good point too about what we're trying to do in terms of fiduciaries of the overall costs here. But everything else, I think a cogent argument has been made for the other positions. I do think, and we still have to deal with this statement that was made about half hour ago, and understanding about the other boards wanting a limit on the number of FTEs. And that sort of, in some respects, that sometimes gets in the way of what we're talking about in terms of, I mean, it's one thing to say, well, we just can't do it. It's another thing to, replace my judgment for the needs. I think the needs for the math interventionists and the technology support specialists have been successfully articulated. That's separate from whether or not those are going to ultimately pass muster with the other boards. So long story short, I would, consistent with what Greg said, I would take out line 20 if I was being asked to vote right now. And I'm comfortable with the proviso on line 21 about the Intervention Academy.
Taking out the SAT alone is 1.4%.
So to be clear, if we were to vote on this version of it, we would have to amend Katie's original motion.
I would entertain that friendly amendment.
For formalities purposes, I'd ask for a friendly amendment to take out line 20 from your motion.
Does that need a second?
I second.
Then Katie would have to accept.
No, you don't. You actually don't need a second. Katie just has to accept or not.
Accept.
Can you please just summarize that new?
Stacy?
Can you scroll the screen back, Stacy?
So is that the yes to tech, yes to math, no to SAT, and no to Madison Intervention Academy?
That includes Madison Intervention Academy. This is just taking the SAT out.
Just taking the SAT out. Okay.
Could does this? I'm a little muddy. Could it be added? Did we say that it could be added at a later date if possible?
SAT?
It could be, yeah.
So if we found staffing within that fiscal year and we wanted to do a line transfer that would go to the Board of Ed, then sure, we could do that. But we just can't carry over funds from one year to the next.
Right.
So how likely is it that the Board of Finance and Board of Selectmen are going to support adding 2 positions?
Yeah, I'm worried that we're going to get 0 positions.
Well, the thing is, you got to keep in mind that they can't tell you where to cut. They can come up with $100,000 and ask the Board of Education to go back and reduce their budget for $100,000, but they do not have line item control.
Yeah,
and I learned that from our former chair, Jean Fitzgerald used to say that all the time. And she also used to say, this is our budget. It's our budget to do what's right for kids. And from there, if they look at it with a fiscal hat on and decide it's too much, then they are entitled to cut it.
Is it in our best interest to make the cuts before it goes to them, or just give it to them, let them cut it, and then make our decision which of those are our priority items?
Well, to me, Violet, what I always try to think in my head is, again, if we're doing what's right for kids, it's defendable. It is, I mean, and the administration has spent a lot of time tonight explaining their rationale behind these positions. If the board feels like this is the budget we want to put forward, then, then that they have to be the ones to say why not. And again, I feel very strongly, even without this compromise, but with this compromise included, I feel like this is right for kids right now. And these are the areas that our kids are going to need the most support. And I wish we could do more, frankly, a lot more, especially after this kind of disjointed year. But I'm satisfied with where we are, and I am happy to make that amendment. But beyond that, I really feel strongly about this budget.
And I just want to add, I have strong reservations for a 30,000 2-week program.
I would echo Violet.
I'm going to go back to that again and say,
Yeah.
what I heard is that that's going to be looked at.
Right.
Am I right?
Well, they should look at all of it. I mean, they do every year, I think.
No, I mean specifically, I'm confirming that Craig, I saw Craig nodding, but yes.
Right, but they're asking that you approve an amount for something that we don't know exactly what it looks like. That's my issue.
I'll put it this way. I'm willing to take the risk, I guess. I don't know how to phrase that correctly, but the chance that we'll figure that out for, as Galen pointed out, a relatively low portion of the budget.
So would we get to approve that program, or the money is just there now so you can kind of put whatever program you feel best? Like, will that program be presented like, here's what we'd like to do with the $30,000, or it's just, here's what we're doing moving forward? I have not come across this in a budget before where we just kind of, here's some money, come back to us with some other ideas. So I'm curious just how that would work.
Sensing the concern, I don't know that, this would typically be the case. I think this is very unique in terms of this. My sense is, or my suggestion is that we come back to the board with at least 2 options, and that the board give us the direction on that. So the 2 options could be Intervention Academy, similar to how it's prepared. This was something we didn't know what it looked like even as we were presenting it because of the unique nature of it. We don't know if we have the staff, all those reasons that we went through. So it could be I'm thinking at this point it would be summer versus fall with details to both, hashed out quite a bit more. And then a third option could be continuous throughout the summer. Like multiple checkpoints throughout the summer, something different. But I think for us, it's I think the board is consistent with it. There's a need. There's going to be a need. We want to service as many students as we can, and we want to have it as impactful as possible. So, I think that we'll keep working on that and bring that back to the board when we can.
I'm comfortable with that.
So can I call the vote?
Well, I think
you could.
Go ahead, Greg. Sorry.
In terms of parliamentary procedure, you could, and anyone could at any time call the question, and then we would vote on whether or not the question would be called immediately. If 2/3 of the people voted in favor of calling the question, we would immediately have to vote with no further discussion for any reason. But if you do that, that means that you're cutting off all discussion. So I'm just noting that part of the process.
Well, we've had a very thorough discussion. Does anybody have any other questions, concerns, or issues?
My only question would be, before we call the vote and close it, and that's that, just to make sure that Dr. Cook and the administration don't want to take a second go at this, knowing that what we're proposing right now is the removal of the SAT program at this point. So that's all that I would want to throw out there.
In response to that, I would, I know it was in front of the board last year. We do feel strongly about it. I think it has a great benefit. The huge equity piece that we're providing it to all students. I think it's a huge savings to families, $100 versus, considerably more of a private program, over $1,000. I think there's the accountability piece. I think there's all those pieces, but I think, as we've said, I would feel more comfortable bringing that back at another time. Again, having a greater discussion, and if there's funds available, maybe we're looking at that on a scaled down basis or some other way. But, as I said, something that's very important to me, I think it's very important to the town, is having as much consensus on the board around the budget as possible and moving forward. And I never would expect to get everything we want in one budget year. And certainly, we didn't start with that, but I think there's some good pieces in here that allow us to move forward, certainly in the areas of security and technology, and some student support. So, we feel good about it.
Okay, thank you.
I do know that in the past on social media, I have seen members of the public not supporting new positions from the Board of Ed with decreasing enrollment. And even though we look at the possible need or the probable need for a math interventionist, adding a full-time tech support and a math interventionist, 2 full-time positions this year, I don't know is the way to go.
Well, all right. Greg, if I close discussion, do we need to have Katie call the vote?
No,
No.
just, if you could just ask for more discussion, and if there isn't, you just proceed.
That's right.
Can I just ask, I'm sorry, can we include in the motion the total budget for 21-22, the total dollar amount?
Yes.
Only if you say it.
Okay, okay, Jean.
All right. So,
So then, Stacy, fill in the blanks, okay?
Okay.
So the motion on the table with the friendly amendment is a motion to approve the administration's recommended budget, except for line 20.
20.
Thank you. What he said, 20.
Mhm.
And the amount of
$59,372,037.
all in favor?
Well,
Oh,
that was okay. All right. So thank you for that amended motion. Do we have a second for that? We don't need that. All right.
Your second remains. It was Emily.
All right. Thank you. All right. Hearing no further discussion, let's call a vote. All in favor, please vote aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. All opposed? Any abstention? Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't see the video. So any opposed? Okay, thank you. I have 2 nays. Abstentions? Okay, by my count, and please correct the arithmetic, motion carries 7-2 to approve the budget as stated. All right.
thank you, everybody.
Well, we have 3 more items on the agenda. No, I'm just teasing. All right, we do have 1 more item. And by the way, thank you to everybody concerned. Thank you to the administration. Thank you to the teachers, to the principals, to the facilities, and not least to all the board members. I mean, there's a lot of clarity and a lot of light and very little heat generated, which is always a good thing. And
It
thank
was
you.
a great discussion.
All right. So do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
Second.
Thank
No
you.
friendly amendments accepted.
Thank you very much. All right, we will adjourn this meeting as of 8:47 p.m. Thank you very
Night,
much.
everybody. Thank you.
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Good job,
Bye.
everybody.